So I came to realize here that we have spent, by my count, this is going to be week 16 on the study of forgiveness. And I don't know that I knew what I was getting involved with when we started this. I don't know. You may not have known what you were getting involved with when you started this. Um, But I hope that for those of you that have been with me for at least part of this journey, that you would be able to say that you've learned something. I would suggest that if you've gone through 15 lessons on forgiveness, that probably puts you in a certain percentile of people who have studied this subject. I don't know that people go as in depth as what we have gone in this particular studies. Um, there's been a few comments over the last several weeks that have sort of resonated with me that I want to try to answer some of the questions that you have. And one of the things that I think we have done a really good job on over the previous 15 weeks is I think that we have been able to really get a pretty hearty inventory and descriptions on the different facets of forgiveness, right? We've talked about, well, what is forgiveness? We've talked about the law of forgiveness. We've talked about how to forgive, small things, medium things, big things. We've talked about the need to forgive a parent. We've talked about the need to forgive God, about things that come through. We've had all these different things that we have done. And while I think we have a number of things that have been technically or mechanically correct, I think there's still a piece that's been missing. Because there were a couple comments last week about, hey, we can know all the stuff about forgiveness. I can give you a blank piece of paper. You can probably give me a lot of good information on that right now. We can know the importance. We can know the value of forgiving, and yet some of us still pause, right? Some of us still have hesitation. There's some resistance that comes. Maybe there's doubt, and I don't know that anybody that's been part of this would say that there is a doubt on whether or not you think forgiveness is right. I think we would agree that forgiveness is the thing to do. There is perhaps there's a doubt on how possible it is for your situation. Maybe that's what it is. So today, I don't know if we're going to make it through it all today. One, because I'm a little late starting. Two, this is an important topic, so we want to get it right versus just get through it, right? Today we're going to look at faith to forgive. We've talked about all these things about forgiveness, but I don't know that we've done a whole lot about talking about faith that's necessary in it. And so we're going to talk about this. I think one of the next steps that we're going to look at is how do we support people going through forgiveness, right? Because there's times we need to be able to encourage and lift people up. If you were to go through your Bible, you could probably open it up to pretty much any page in this book. You're going to find no shortage of stories of people exercising faith to do many things, right? If I asked you for some stories, just start making a list. You'd probably be able to make quite a list of people who exercise their faith. And sometimes the way that when they exercise their faith, it can look like a rescue, it can look like a blessing. In some instances, that those exercises of faith may even look like a miracle. We're going to look at one of those today. And there's a time when Jesus was giving some instruction to his disciples about how you need to have faith, and that if you had faith even as small as a mustard seed, that it can make all the difference. It can make all the difference. And I think that's really interesting because, like, what did the disciples see firsthand? They saw some amazing things firsthand, and yet still Jesus is giving them instructions on the need for faith, even a small amount of faith. So with that, I think many of us carry with us experiences in life that, at least by our standards, are pretty big. We probably have some situations that we have gone through, and whether maybe it's a blunder that we committed, maybe it's something that somebody did to us. I don't know what that situation is for you, but as we look at it and it's big. It's a big deal to us, right? I had a mentor tell me one time, he said he had a guy come to him and asked if he would re-sign, or if he would sign or co-sign a loan for him, that it was a recurring loan. And the mentor thought that this guy was a pretty safe bet, so he went ahead and he co-signed the loan. It was for $100,000. And what he didn't understand is that it was a recurring loan, so it was like a line of credit type thing. So he borrowed it, he paid it back, and then somewhere down the line, the guy borrowed again, and when he borrowed again, he couldn't pay it back. And my mentor tells the story about he learned what the word recurring means. He said that he made the comment, in the grand scheme of things, $100,000 isn't that much money. He said, but when it's all you have, it feels enormous. When it's all you have, perhaps it feels like a mountain. Perhaps it feels like a mountain. Now, I don't know what burdens, what heavy things that you're dealing with today. Maybe it involves money, maybe it involves honor, maybe it involves legacy, maybe it involves identity. Maybe someone insulted your wife's meatloaf. Because I've realized that that's an issue I have. Like, I'm allowed to make fun of my wife's meatloaf, and as an aside, we had meatloaf for dinner last night. We did. I don't care. I could not care less, Steve. Thank you, but I don't care if Cracker Barrel makes meatloaf. But like it's like there's certain things that I can pick on, but somebody else can't, right? And so like that was one of those things I came to realize as we've gone through these lessons, that like that's an issue I have. Like, I can make fun of my wife's meatloaf, although I've committed to you that I will not make fun of it. I'm not making fun of it right now, but somebody else doing it, that offends me. Right? Like, that's where it is. We need to take a look at this, the importance of faith in the process of forgiveness. So I think we're going to start out here with that. We recognize what forgiveness is, but I think some of us have hesitation that it's possible. That like it's so big. We can understand what the Bible tells us about forgiveness. We can understand what Jesus did to forgive us. We can have practical examples, yet we look at our own particular situations, and somehow that may feel just a little bit out of reach. And so what this tells us is that our issues with forgiving is not an understanding issue. It's not a knowledge issue, but it's a believing issue. It's a faith issue. And I think there's part of it where we need to be able to believe that the process of forgiveness, going through that, can lead to somewhere good, and that with whatever burden that was was experienced in that situation, that burden could be lessened or even disappear. And sometimes that's a hard thing. So this is where we really need to talk about faith. We're going to start out today in Romans chapter 17 or chapter 10, verse 17. The Apostle Paul writes, he says, consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word about Christ. And so Paul tells us that knowledge alone doesn't produce faith. Knowledge alone doesn't. You know, even though we've gone through 15 weeks of studying forgiveness, our faith still needs to be developed. You may just need to have a mustard seed type faith this morning to be able to move forward, right? We can understand the bells and whistles. We can understand the nuances. We can even take some of the models that we've looked at and we said, I think this model makes some sense. I'm willing to go down this, or I can see how this model would work, but then there's your situation. There's the situation where you are. There's a story in Scripture. We're going to look at two different versions of this story. First in the Gospel of Mark, and the second in the Gospel of Matthew. So if you would turn with me to Mark chapter 9. We're going to look at verses 14 through 29. Mark 9, 14 through 29. This section is called Jesus Heals a Boy Possessed by an Impure Spirit. Story goes, when they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder and ran to greet him. What are you arguing with them about? He asked. A man in the crowd answered, Teacher, I brought you my son who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. Whenever it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I asked your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. Jesus says, you unbelieving generation, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy to me. So they brought him. When the spirit saw Jesus, it immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the boy's father, how long has he been like this? From childhood, he answered. It has often thrown him into a fire or water to kill him. But if you do anything, take pity on us and help us. Jesus says, if you can. Did you catch that? The father says, but if you can do anything, if, it's conditional, if you can do anything. Jesus looks at him and says, if you can, everything is possible for one who believes. And I don't know if you're a Bible underliner or highlighter or whatever, but I can't encourage it enough to mark that sentence. Everything is possible for one who believes. Immediately the boy's father exclaimed, I do believe. Help me overcome my unbelief. When Jesus saw that a crowd was running to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit. You deaf and mute spirit, he said, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. The spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, he's dead. But Jesus took him by the hand, lifted him to his feet, and he stood up. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, why couldn't we drive it out? Jesus replied, this kind can come out only by prayer. Have you heard that story before? That's one you've probably encountered at some point here and there. I think this story gives us an excellent illustration about how real the struggle can be. How real the struggle can be to believe in healing, be able to believe in forgiveness. Right? Look at this father's his statement. He says, "I do believe. Help me with my unbelief." We deal with things that we may conceptually understand, but we can still struggle to believe and trust. And here's the thing. Faith is always about trusting God with what feels too big. Faith is always about trusting God with things that seem too big for us. You see, we have to have this faith when we come across these tasks that just seem so much bigger than anything that we could handle. You don't know how to comprehend these things. You don't know where to start. You may not even feel like you have the resources to be able to tackle it, and that's where you need faith. And we're going to look at this in a second, but you don't need much. You just start with what you have. Let's turn over to the Gospel of Matthew. No, before you turn, if you're still in Mark, turn back a page or so. Mark 9. Let me find. I just want to point this out. Maybe if my pages don't. What's the story before this story in the Gospel of Mark? The Transfiguration. Some of the disciples had seen something amazing. Amazing. Now let's turn back. What do I do here? Let's turn back to Matthew chapter 17. Matthew chapter 17, we're going to pick up at verse 14. But before we do that, look at the story before this. Look at the header for the story before this. So if you look at Matthew chapter 17, verse 1, you see it's Matthew's version of the Transfiguration. And what's the story that comes right after it is Jesus healing a demon-possessed boy. So let's pick up this story at verse 14, okay? It says, "When they came to a crowd, a man approached Jesus and knelt before him. 'Lord, have mercy on my son. He has seizures and is suffering greatly. He often falls into the fire or into the water. I brought him to your disciples, but they could not heal him.' Jesus responds, 'You unbelieving and perverse generation, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring the boy here to me.'" Similar story, right? This part of it, we're all on the same page. Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of the boy, and he was healed at that moment. Verse 19. Then the disciples came to Jesus in private and said, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" Pretty much same story to this point. Matthew records a little different instruction here. Jesus says, "Because you have so little faith, truly I tell you, if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move. Nothing will be impossible for you." And I think Jesus uses this mustard seed example because how do you measure the size of your faith? If I went around and I said, "Hey, tell me about your faith. How much do you have? Can you quantify it?" And maybe it depends a little bit on what the situation is, but what Jesus is instructing his disciples here is that you got to take what you have and use it. You take that little bit that you have, and you trust that that can do something. And the example here, the note that I have here says mountains are moved by trust, not confidence, which I thought was interesting, and it made me wonder if you were to make a list of some of the mountains in your life that have been moved, what would be on that list? What would be on that list? Maybe at one point it was getting through school, or it was some work, there was some big project that you were involved with. And when it came time, maybe it was a health thing, you're going to get in shape, whatever it was. There was something that it was big and you wanted to undertake it. How did it start? Whatever that thing was, how did it start? Chances are it was something pretty small. Like right now, I'll talk about this a little bit more in a little bit, but I'm coaching 3rd and 4th grade basketball. How I got involved in this, well, I'm a recovering people pleaser. I just said yes to try to make somebody happy. That's how it happened. But like these little boys, they know that the ball's supposed to go in the hoop, but they get the ball, they run to half court because they think that's where they're supposed to shoot from, right? Like it's just how do they get better? They get better one bounce at a time, right? It's like, and the thing is as a coach, you stand there and you watch this. I'm like, okay, we need to do this, we need to do this, we need to do this. Like you got to start somewhere. You got to start, and chances are it's small. I think we need to, this may be encouragement that you've offered somebody else at some time, but it may be something like this: do not despise the small beginnings. Do not despise those humble first steps that you took. Right? I had a couple things here. The journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. Right? If you're going to get there, it's going to take something. You don't start at mile 999. Start with the first step. Right? I was sitting at a meeting, and we were looking at a big project, and one of the district managers raised his hand and he said, well, this reminds me of the old question of how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. And truthfully, that's how we exercise our faith, is one step at a time, one action. And when we start to faithfully forgive someone, we need to recognize that it may be a small step. It may be an imperfect step. It may be short-lived, right? That may be how it goes. It's kind of like how an infant learns how to walk, right? What's that process look like? They learn to stand, and they take the first step, and what happens? Fall down. Now, I want to encourage all of us in here, because I believe we've all gone through that process. Now, maybe you don't remember, but the fact that you walk today is kind of a testimony that you stood up at one time, you took a step, and you fell down, and you know what you didn't do? You didn't stay down. You faithfully, whether you realize it or not, stood up again, and you took another step, and maybe you went down then. And then maybe you took 2 steps, and then you went down, or 3 steps, whatever it did. There was some process to do that, to the point where eventually you started running around the house and driving your parents nuts. Like that's how it works, right? We've all successfully navigated that. We've probably all successfully navigated this in other areas outside of learning to walk. And I hope you can take that as encouragement for some of these big things that you may struggle with forgiving others with. It may be a similar process. There may be a lot of failures with that, but I don't know if some of you have gone on to do some pretty amazing things. Do I have any marathon runners in here? Has anybody ever heard of a marathon? How about we start there? We've heard of marathon. Hey, look at that. There's people who have taken that first step, and there's people that go and do 26 miles. Right? Right? That's where we are. Now, forgiveness requires faith for 3 reasons. I'm going to give the first one. First reason is this, is that you will forgive before you feel relief. You will faith is going to precede feeling. Forgiveness is obedience first and healing later. So you're gonna forgive, and then the relief for that will come later. We need to have faith because second reason is that you will release some debt. Release some debt or offense, right? There's something that happens. And it requires faith because you don't know how God's going to settle it. And it requires faith because it shows belief in a brighter future. Paul writes to the church in Corinth in 2 Corinthians 5:2. He says, "We live by faith, not by sight." You read that before? It's one thing to read it, it's another thing to do it, right? We've talked before about how there's some forgiveness that we find ourselves in that you can just be like, okay, yeah, whatever, it's gone. But then there's other forgiveness that we find ourselves in that takes a little longer. And some of it takes a lot longer. And we talked about how it's a path, it's a walk, it's a journey. It's not just an emotional event, right? As I was putting this together, the phrase that I'll give you is you're more likely to act your way into a feeling than to feel your way into an action. All right. Now, I don't know. Did anybody wake up this morning, look out the window, see, and think, I really don't feel like going out today? Did anyone? I mean, some of you are honest. We still have that. We have that honesty lesson coming up some point, right? Like there's part of it where it's like, don't feel like that. I don't feel like that. And I mean, the fact of the matter is, if you look at this, like the feeling that I have right now is go to bed, get up about May. Anybody with me? Like it'd be sort of nice, right? We are not real likely to feel our way into actions. We have to act our way into feelings. And as I wrote that down this morning, Jess, I was actually thinking about you at the swim meet many years ago, because it was a day, I don't know, it was like this, but we had a swim meet that Jess didn't really want to go to. And I told him, I said, hey, you're more likely to act your way into a feeling than to feel your way into an action, which I thought was just wonderfully like Mike Brady type Brady Bunch advice, right? Like it's just, hey, this is good wisdom for you. And it was interesting. We go to the swim meet, and whenever it was all said and done, we got back in the car, and Jess says to me, he says, "Dad, you were right." Which, I mean, I have to sort of write these things down because it's not very often that my rightness is acknowledged. Uh, but I said, what was I right about? He says, I did act my way into a feeling. You remember that? No? Okay, I remember it. And that's a lesson for all of us. It's a lesson of discipline, right? There's a lot of folks that, made the New Year's resolution to get in shape, go to the gym, get in shape, right? And then, January 1 comes, phew, January or December 31 came before January 1, which maybe made January 1 a little bit harder to get up and go to the gym, right? Some people did it. Some people said, I'm going to act my way into the feeling, even when you don't feel like acting that way. And that's so important because what if the feeling never comes? What if the feeling to forgive never comes? That's a dangerous thing. That's a dangerous thing. We are when we take this faithful approach to forgive, we are trusting God to help us see that freedom. I think that's the feeling that we want to have when you go through forgiveness, is you want to have that feeling of freedom, and you may not understand how that happens at first. You may not, but you have to take that step to forgive. You have to take that action so that feeling can potentially come. I think it was last week we looked at the parable of the unforgiving servant, where the master comes and calls the servant who owed him tons and tons of money. He ultimately ends up forgiving him, but then when that servant was forgiven, he goes out, he immediately tries to collect the debt on somebody else, right? And so I thought it was a really important lesson for us to illustrate God's expectation of us around forgiveness, right? I think there's a pretty high expectation. And I think there's also part of this where the servant that was forgiven lacked a little trust in being able to and to be able to let that move forward. I'll call your attention to Romans chapter 12, verse 19. Paul writes to the church in Rome, "Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, 'It is mine to avenge, I will repay,' says the Lord." And this is something that we need to look at and recognize. And this is just to emphasize point number 2 here, is that it's not our job for justice. God's going to make sure justice happens. And I got to thinking about that. I'm in a gym with 9 third and fourth graders. And I'll just let that sit, because as I say it just sounds absurd, right? But I'm in this gym, and like what happens is so-and-so's doing this, so-and-so said that, so-and-so did, and it's like, oh my goodness. Like what I want is I sort of want to be like drill sergeant-esque type in these scenarios. And I don't know how to appropriately administer justice in that. I mean, this is an absurd example. I get it, but I hope that this gives you some type of illustration. So, a bit of it becomes, well, why don't the two of you go sit the drill out? Just go sit on the stage, and when you decide that you want to play again, we'll look at this, right? Because I don't know how to referee. I have limitations. My justice is limited. Now this is just one microcosm. I have two daughters that sometimes don't get along. You're allowed to laugh at that. Like, which one's right? Uh, Chances are they're both wrong. That's probably the biggest. That's probably the most real thing, right? But like the thing is that we have to release things to recognize that God will bring justice. And there's times that that's hard to believe, right? There's times that we need to have faith to move through that. Forgiveness is faith that God will handle justice better than we can. I don't think I got to put this one down. I'll draw your attention to the book of Isaiah, chapter 43. Um, Forgiveness requires faith because we have to believe that the future will not be as burdensome as the present, that the future can somehow be lighter for us, right? It can somehow be a brighter, more optimistic. Isaiah chapter 43, we're going to do verse 18 in the first part of 19, and God says, "Forget the former things, do not dwell on the past. I am doing a new thing." I am doing a new thing. Forgiveness is rooted in forward-looking trust. And the thing about God's work is that we often can't see it. We often can't see it in the moment, right? Like there's times that God's doing all sorts of different things in the background and you don't see it for some time. It may be short, it may be long, but there is some time. And so we have to go and we have to navigate through that. Psalm 30 verse 5 reads, "Weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning." You know, faith tells us that there are times for things, right? And that there may be a period, there may be a night of endurance, but eventually joy will come, right? And that's that lighter, that's that brighter future that we're looking for. I'm short on time. I want to give you a visual model of this before we're done, though, today. Um, I'm going to express this two-dimensionally, and then I hope to be able to apply this three-dimensionally, and hopefully this will make sense. But there's a cycle that we find ourselves in where there is some offense or hurt that we're involved with, right? There's something that happens. And we carry that for some amount of time. We carry that for some amount of time. And then we get to the point where we decide to forgive, right? There's this decision to forgive. And this is fortified by faith, right? That's what this is saying. This is just a simple prayer where we say, God, I trust you in this situation. And maybe you've been in a place like that before. God, I trust you in this situation. And maybe that trust lasts seconds. Maybe it lasts minutes, hours, I don't know. But there's some amount of time that goes on. Right? We have faith and we're like, God, I know I need to forgive this. I forgive this. And there's some time that passes. And you have some partial relief. However, maybe that offense or that hurt comes back. Have you ever thought that you were over something and then somebody says or does something that reopens that wound? Is that familiar to anybody else? Uh, yeah. Yeah, like it's a process where we have this offense, we have this hurt, we decide, you know what? It's not going to do me any good to keep a hold of this. I want to forgive it. I'm going to forgive in faith. God, I trust you with what I'm forgiving here. There's some time that passes, and it may not be long. You may have relief for a short period of time, and then you feel it again. And you're going to have to make that decision. And this is two-dimension. And this is where, and I'm not an artist. I haven't said that for a while, but I'll just remind you, I am not an artist. But what I want you to think about is I want you to think about a spiral. And it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you go up. I share this as an illustration because if we take this, we turn on its side, maybe that first time is short. But if you keep doing this again and again and again, this is where, how many times should I forgive my brother who has offended me? Should I do 7 times? Or is it 7 times 70? And if you keep doing this, like that's the healing process for forgiveness. And faith is such an important thing because if we don't have faith, you know what? You may not go through this process again. I forgave him once. That didn't do me a whole lot of good. Anybody else said something like that? Just me? Yeah. Yeah, I forgave you 3 times, right? You know, like it was, that's not the call. That's not the call. That's not the challenge that we find ourselves, that we find before ourselves. So today we have at least touched on the need and the importance to forgive, right? I'm going to stop there for today. There's a little more to this lesson, but I'll start to put that into next week because how do we come alongside those people as they're struggling to forgive? Let me ask you this. Let me ask this a different way. Does anybody, this is a group participation, show of hands, how many people have something that they know they need to forgive now? I think most of us do. All right. How many of us recognize intellectually that the right thing to do would be to forgive? We have that understanding, right? Maybe we recognize that it's a little more than I can handle on my own. How do we come along each other and support? How do we come along and help prop each other up as we go through that process? And it may be quite simple, it may be complex. That's what we're going to dive into next week. We're going to see what the Bible tells us about that process. So I'll use that. Now that's the process. Yeah, that's what we're going to look at next week. Questions, comments, answers.